Okonski. You can read about me in the program if you want to know my biographical details. I'm going to talk about water management, and I titled this Droughts, Deluges, and Water Wars, Managing Water for Today and Tomorrow. Just a quick overview of what I'm going to talk about. Basically, water stress and water problems are alleged to be one of the impacts of climate change, changing quantities of water based on the world's anthropogenic climate change. But I've studied water in depth, and I think that the world already has significant water problems today, and they relate to management of water mostly. And going further on that, government policies are the main cause of mismanagement of water, and I believe that incentive-compatible policies alongside new technologies are going to be the way forward. So, these are just two quotes from the IPCC's report. I'm not going to read them because they're just showing that they're predicting with high confidence that there are going to be huge changes in water distribution around the world, river runoff, and a decrease in water resources in many areas. So floods, droughts, hurricanes, monsoon variability, and shifting patterns of rainfall and snowfall. And basically, I believe that these are problems, if we look back in history, that they've always been problems, and people have to find a way to cope with them. The actual quantity of water that we have to deal with in different geographical regions, it's always going to be variable. And so I think that physical water scarcity doesn't mean absolute scarcity, and it doesn't necessarily mean economic scarcity. These are just a couple of the more specific potential impacts of climate change. So floods, this is a picture of flooding in Bihar, which is the poorest region of India, that happened in this past August. Bihar has had flooding every year or every other year for just going back for centuries. So I don't know that you can necessarily claim that anthropogenic climate change is the cause of this. It might have an impact on it in the future, but what we've seen up till now is that flood control policies in Bihar are generally the remit of the state. Individuals have very little impact over their local area. They don't own their property. They can't build robust homes that would withstand these floods. So what you see is the floods displacing hundreds of thousands of people every time they happen. And in combination with this, Bihar is the most corrupt state in India. So the state officials are inept, and the monies that are sent to them for flood control disappear mysteriously. Another potential impact of climate change is droughts and acute water scarcity. So the IPCC is saying a warmer climate will mean more evaporation from the soil, and so tropical forests are going to change into being savanna. There'll be diminished water availability for rain-fed agriculture. Variability of rainfall will increase. Sorry about that typo. It will affect underground water supplies and local food supplies and farmers' income. So water is fundamental to many, many economic processes, so obviously we do need to be worried about it. In urban areas, this is one of the areas that I think I've studied a little bit more in depth than the specific climate impacts. Government water systems around the world, and especially in poorer countries, are basically falling apart. They subsidize wealthy users, and poor people do not have water from these systems, at least. They lack sewerage, so waterborne diseases are prolific. This is the cause, in large part, of the 10 million deaths relating that Julian was speaking about earlier. So you have diseases like diarrhea and cholera that kill children, whereas in wealthier countries we don't have those problems for the most part. And this problem is going to continue it could get worse because in poorer countries, many people are moving from rural areas into urban areas. So over the coming decades, that's forecasted to be an increase of 10 to 15%, which means not only do those water problems get worse in urban areas, but that there will be less water available for agriculture in rural areas And then what you also have is just a lack of funding. Technologies are not inexpensive enough to be widely adopted by poorer people and poorer countries. And then in combination, you have corrupt officials and generally policies that are not serving to empower the poor to get on with things and solve these problems. I think when we look at the situation globally, agricultural water management is probably the biggest area where reforms are needed. My colleague Indra Gokulani, who isn't at this conference but has written extensively on this, shows that 66% of freshwater withdrawals in the world are for agriculture, and it comprises 85% of freshwater consumption. So, whereas land efficiency has increased and agricultural productivity has increased in the past century, water efficiency has not, it has declined, which is sad and troublesome for the future if we're going to have more people on the planet that need food and people demanding more, I'm missing my word, things like meat. So we need grain to feed the cattle, so we have to have more water to produce the grain. And so that means that we must address these water problems urgently. And I just got this interesting fact yesterday. It takes 3,000 liters of water to feed a single person for a day. So that just gives you an idea of the quantities of water involved in producing crops for human consumption. And water around the world remains largely the remit of government. It's not an economic commodity in the same way that metals are or timber is. So, and government control over water means that water is basically wasted. People that are water users, and especially farmers, have a disincentive to adopt new technologies that would make every drop of water used in their processes more efficient. And to make the situation worse, the government subsidizes water use. So this just compounds the problems that I just outlined. And moreover, you have an absence of market-driven prices. Because of that, people cannot make trade-offs about in their economic decision-making based on the relative scarcity of water. So again, just to summarize, the world's water problems exist in spite of climate change. Climate change could improve or worsen the situation in many areas, but the primary policies that are suggested to deal with climate change, namely mitigation of emissions, are unlikely to affect the situation at all, and it certainly will not improve poor water management around the world. And finally, we can't control nature. So we need to have policies that enable us to adapt to nature, to promote flexibility, and to take advantage of local knowledge and local situations. So possible solutions. I said despair because that seems to be what a lot of environmentalists want to do. But I don't think that's a good solution. Government regulation and intervention. We've seen the problems that government causes, and I could go on, but I'm limited. So if you want to talk to me about that afterwards, please do. We could go with the UN's version of adaptation to climate change, but I believe that's problematic. Or we could use incentive-compatible policies. So the IPCC's adaptation, I think, might be more appropriately be called planned adaptation, centrally planned adaptation. So they outline a few very narrow things: expanded rainwater harvesting, water storage and conservation, water reuse, desalinization, water use, and irrigation efficiency. But the problems with this definition, which extend all over the IPCC's versions of adaptation to whatever climate impacts, it's just troubleshooting. It's a piecemeal approach. It's very reliant on foreign aid. It assumes that governments in wealthy countries are simply going to continue pouring money into poorer countries to help them build bridges or flood canals. But it doesn't. Adaptation should really mean enabling humans to deal with problems that are thrown at us, and enabling us to be flexible and change our behaviors and make better decisions. So this definition does not focus on empowerment, on enabling decentralized decision-making and taking account of local knowledge. This is a quote from our chairman from a publication that we have up here if you'd like to take it. Successful adaptation to global warming is most likely to happen where goods, services, inputs, and resources are allocated in markets that are free and competitive. Efficient pricing of water, as occurs if that resource is bought and sold freely as opposed to being distributed by governments at subsidized prices, is essential at the national level. So what are incentive-compatible policies? Property rights and ownership that enable people to resolve competing claims over their resources and to trade those resources with each other. And then trade, which enables all the users of a resource to decide what's the most highly valued use of that resource, in this case water. Competition, especially in these urban areas, government often has a monopoly over water provision. So in the least, government water providers should be subjected to competition with other providers to enable consumers to have choice. Market prices, which come out of all of these things. Market prices reflect the relative scarcity of resources. Without prices, we can't make well-informed decisions about the best uses of water or any other resource. We need a level playing field, no subsidies to any users. Again, this helps markets decide what is the best use of resources. And other institutional arrangements that can't really be described here. I'll describe one in a couple minutes in Gujarat in India, but that enable us to take account of local knowledge and allow people in those areas that might be water deprived to adapt to their situation. Why do incentive-compatible policies work with water? They, first of all, enable us to have an entrepreneurial approach to water. Every user of water or every producer views this as an opportunity rather than a threat. Government water systems often view each additional user, and this is especially true in poor countries, as a threat. There are people that live in the peripheral urban areas of cities who do not own their property and thereby are excluded from government water, receiving government water, because government won't recognize their property rights. It's very circuitous and stupid. Incentives work because they give us an individualized understanding of our water use. For instance, through metering. I understand how much water I'm using when I take a shower every day, and I have to pay for that water. They give us an ability to generate revenue and investment in new technologies. They enable more sustainable use of water and innovation, again. They enable us to use every unit of water more efficiently so that abundance and scarcity in different areas are opportunities rather than problems. And they enable us to identify new uses for water and new sources of water. And they enable complementary decision making. So if I'm an individual, I can decide what I should plant in my lawn. If I have to pay for my water and I'm paying the actual market price of it, then I may not plant acres of green grass. I might plant native vegetation that's less water intensive. Or entrepreneurial decisions. Should I grow alfalfa, which is a very water intensive crop? Farmers in Montana grow alfalfa, and maybe that doesn't make sense. Maybe I should grow avocados, which may be less water intensive. And also, just the general situation here, new markets mean that opportunities for new technologies to proliferate, to take hold, and to enable more efficient water use. So I'll give two examples now, and then wrap up. I don't want to take my time away from other speakers. In Chile, they have adopted a market-based system of water management. Both in urban and rural areas, they have 100% access to potable water, and sewerage is also coming in as a result of that. And farmers have the ability to trade water with each other. So that means that there's actually a spot market for water in the Limarí Valley, which is north of Santiago. So this has enabled much more efficient water use, and farmers have benefited, people have benefited from it, and it seems to be a very good model that could be adopted elsewhere. India, the example I referred to earlier in Gujarat, where people working together in a very decentralized manner have addressed their own water scarcity problems by building what are called check dams in the streams. So the check dams, I guess the idea is that they enable the stream water to percolate down into the groundwater, thereby increasing the water availability for all the users. And another example identified by an author of a book that my colleague Baron Mitra published in India is the hosiery industry in an area of Tamil Nadu, India, in which farmers have been trading their water to the industry. And the water market, this is an informal water market. It's not recognized by the government. The government doesn't want to enable policies that would, or want to have policies that would enable this market to exist. But the market is valued at $24 million, whereas the loss of agricultural production from that water is only $50,000. So this is obviously a good trade-off for everyone. There are potential problems with natural disasters, and I believe this was also shown in Julian's presentation, that basically we need to empower people through property rights and other institutions to enable them to have prosperity. Disaster doesn't have to mean tragedy whenever a disaster occurs. So what have we seen? Governments are causing the world's water problems, and government policies are unlikely to be the solution for the future. Incentive-compatible policies are more equitable, more flexible, more sustainable. And, I'm sorry, there's no one-size-fits-all solution, but we should aim to involve people and not politicians. And so these decentralized solutions are the way forward for water management. I published a book about this, which is out of print at the moment, but if you're interested, just talk to me afterwards.